Hello, you're listening to Wine Blast. I'm Peter Richards. She's Susie Barry. We're both masters of wine who happen to be married to each other. Clearly need to get out more. And we are once again in danger of getting our geek on. Look at us.
Oh, I think speak for yourself.
I usually do.
I think what we're focusing on...
No authority elsewhere, sorry.
I think what we're focusing on today is a really interesting topic, whether you're a wine geek or not. It may seem a bit niche, but actually it brings together so many different interesting things about wine and wine making. I mean, we talked about additives, didn't we, in a negative sense in our episode on natural wine.
Yeah.
But I think good additives, and this one in particular, don't always get enough airtime.
Good additives, there we are. Fair enough. Yeah, fine. And I suppose, our story does start with a sort of really fun experiment, doesn't it?
It does. So
maybe this isn't pure geekery. I was kind of hoping it was, actually. Anyway, so
no such luck.
This programme is all about Dosage, that magical addition that's, I don't know, sort of like the cherry on the cake of some of the finest sparkling wines on the planet. Does that make sense? Does it work?
I'm not sure that's quite enough. I think we're probably going to need a slightly more comprehensive explanation than that.
Well, I thought we could leave it at that, to be honest. So that was going to be
cherries.
Job done. Off to have a glass of fizz. No, fair enough. Okay, so I never really like those cherries anyway.
No.
Do you?
No. Well, it depends on the cherries.
No,
should we not go down that route? Because I'm not sure it's a long episode, I reckon,
it's
one.
It's going to be a long episode.
Yeah.
Let's just get started. So we'll definitely recap on what Dosage is exactly, why it's used, its history and its future, including some pretty fun experiments along the way, as I've already alluded to, the latest of which may change the course of wine as we know it.
Wine does have some quite strict rules. I've never been a great fan of rules, so this is a perfectly legal product that other people could emulate. It could become a new category in wine. You heard it here first.
Stirring stuff from English Master of Wine Justin Howard-Sneyd. We'll be hearing more from Justin on some fascinating Dosage experiments he's done with his own Heart of Gold English sparkling wine. Also joining us are legendary sparkling winemakers Jean-Baptiste Lécaillon of Champagne Louis Roederer and, all the way from down under, the magician who is Ed Carr of Accolade and House of Arras.
What a lineup.
Yeah. So we better get cracking.
We had.
And I think we should start with what Dosage is.
Okay.
And it's all to do with how traditional method sparkling wine, like champagne, is made. So first of all, you make a still base wine, which you put into bottles, you add some sugar and yeast, and you seal the bottles. The wine inside re-ferments, and that's how the bubbles are created.
Yay.
But don't get excited yet. We're not done. We've got Dosage. Because after that, you need to get the yeast out. So what the winemaker does is gradually turn the bottles upside down, freeze the neck and uncap the wine because of the pressure inside the bottle, that frozen plug of wine and yeast in the neck shoots out.
Yes, the yeast has settled down.
The yeast has settled down into the neck, freeze it, take the crown cap off or, whatever the bottle's sealed with. That shoots out, that little plug shoots out. And that's the process called disgorging.
I think you're doing a wonderful job of this. I could just listen to you all day.
You often have to, poor you. I'm surprised you still say you could.
I'm entirely unused to do. Disgorging. It's always a word that troubles me slightly. But anyway, let's move on.
Let's not go there.
Gorge something about... Anyway, so the disgorging is now done. The yeast is out and the wine is clear.
Yay.
Yeah, we are.
Woohoo.
So, but, there's also that but.
There's always a but.
You got less liquid in the bottle.
You have.
And that's a boo, isn't it?
It's not good.
That is not good. And we don't like being shortchanged.
Not when it's fine champagne or English sparkling wine.
Especially you Yorkshire folk, So the bottle needs topping up. This is
right.
where...
Sorry.
This is the important bit. This is where Dosage comes in. So it's usually a very sweet mixture of wine and sugar. The French call it the liqueur d'expédition. And this small drop of Dosage doesn't just serve the purpose of topping up, but also, crucially, allows the winemaker a chance to fine-tune the flavours and balance of the wine.
Yeah, and this is the key bit that we're going to be exploring in this programme. But I think let's start with the basics. I think some people might be quite surprised, to be honest, that sugar or sweetening can just be added like this to wine.
No, I think that's true, actually. It's worth mentioning. It is relatively rare, in wine. It doesn't tend to happen in normal table wine. If there is a small amount of residual sugar in those, it's just the natural sugar from the grapes that hasn't been fermented out, isn't it? Rather than being added. But I think it may surprise some people to learn that, that dosage is actually the norm when it comes to some of the finest, most expensive champagnes. Almost all of them have had sugar or sweetening added in varying amounts.
But it does tend to be a pretty small amount, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's important to say. So what is it? 6 to 10 grams per litre is pretty common now in terms of sweetness for top champagne style wines.
Yeah.
That's what...
Well, in terms of dosage.
In terms of dosage. So that works out at about 4 to 8
grams of sugar.
In a 75 centilitre bottle.
In a standard
which is
bottle.
Less than 1 gram per glass or whatever. But, crucially, it's not done to make the wine sweet. It's done to make what can be a pretty acidic or certainly very dry sparkling wine taste more balanced and approachable, and also more complex.
Yeah, because the whole point of the traditional or champagne method is to make grapes grown in a cool climate palatable, despite their high acidity.
Yeah.
That was always the point, and it still is. And that's done partly by letting the wine mature with the yeast cells, which give a certain richness to the flavour and the texture, and then also by the addition of the dosage.
Yeah, and it's hardly as if this is a sort of slapdash, easy fix for a dodgy wine. It makes for some of the... Well, it can be, but,
but no,
it really...
Not usually.
So these are some of the finest, most complex and rewarding wines on the planet. It's a time-honed process that's been going on for centuries.
Yeah, and it just works. But it is probably worth mentioning at this point that the trend over time has been to ever more precise dosage with less and less sweetness.
Yeah, good word that. And it's very true. It's a trend that has a long history, So I was surprised to learn when I first started looking into this that the sparkling wine we now know as champagne was originally a sweet wine.
It was, very sweet.
I don't think many people know that. From the very start in the late 17th century, when the traditional champagne method was invented, making it sparkling, the dosage was really, really sweet. So it wasn't added to make a balanced wine. It was just to influence the final style of the wine itself into a sweet wine.
And actually that's why the French have the habit of serving champagne with pudding or dessert, because it was originally a dessert wine. Yeah. But I think, let's be honest, things have moved on since then, and now almost all champagne is what we would call dry, and it really doesn't work at all well with pudding, though that doesn't always stop people serving it that way.
It doesn't. We've had many wonderful occasions when we've had the two separately. I think that'd be fair to say. Anyway, most champagne and similar styles of sparkling wine today are made in a dry style. So in French, the term is brut. And it's legally defined as a wine that has a sweetness level of less than 12 grams per litre, though frequently the actual level is lower.
Yeah, I mean, most non-vintage champagnes are around 10 grams these days. Some are less, but around, I would say that's probably about an average. 8 to 10.
But brut is the most common term you will see on a bottle.
Most bottles, yeah.
But you may also see brut nature or zero dosage, which means very dry, so less than 3 grams per litre of sweetness. Then extra brut is under 6 grams per litre of sweetness. And then there are the sweeter styles. So just to recap, extra dry is 12 to 17 grams per litre.
That is confusing, extra dry.
All of these terms are guaranteed to confuse you. Why would we make it easy? Why would the wine world make something easy? Extra dry? What the hell is that? That should be drier than
dry.
No. So anyway, this is just what it is. And
so
I'm just
extra dry has
a
bit, go on, carry on.
Extra dry, 12 to 17. Sec, which is 17
sounds
to
like
32.
dry again, 17 to 32.
And then 32 to 50 is demi-sec.
That's probably the most common form of slightly sweet champagne, sort of medium sweet champagne that you'll come across.
Absolutely. So that's the kind of, so just remember that demi-sec, which is the most common one, is 32 to 50, which is not, crazy sweet.
No.
It's just sort of sweet and rich. Yeah. And then doux is over 50 grams per litre. That's really rare.
Very rare. Yeah. So as I was saying, over time, the trend has been ever drier. Now we're going to talk about this and zero dosage a bit later on, but it is worth noting because it's quite a hot topic.
Yeah. Well, you did your Master of Wine dissertation on the subject, didn't you?
For my sins, I did. Yeah, but we'll come on to that. I also said that dosage has got ever more precise, and I use that word very deliberately because back in the day it could be a bit like the Wild West on the dosage front, couldn't it? Let's be honest.
The good old days. Yeah, and you know what I mean. Fair, bit of slightly mad experimentation lies behind many a successful innovation, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. It does.
But yeah, they did throw any old stuff in back then, didn't they? In Tom Stevenson and Essie Avalon's brilliant Christie's World Encyclopedia of Champagne and Sparkling Wine, book. They cite Moumenet, who was writing in 1873, who listed the following ingredients normally found in the liqueur d'expédition of Champagne.
Go on.
Port, cognac, fizz dye. I have no idea how to pronounce that, but it's basically
Fizz
elderberry.
dye.
Fizz.
Go on, tell us what it is.
Elderberry with cream of tartar and alum, kirsch, raspberry brandy, and saturated solutions of alum, tartaric acid, and tannin.
No wonder Champagne got the party going, crikey. I mean, that is a lot of stuff. All of that packed into a bottle. I mean, really?
It's packing a punch, isn't it? It makes us look a bit tame today, doesn't it?
We're way too cautious, aren't we?
I know
Weird.
it's common knowledge, isn't it, that additives and flavourings used to be a bit more common in the old days in wine. You know, like pine resin to help keep wine from going off in ancient Greece and Egypt, and I think they recently found some evidence of vanilla, didn't they, being added from amphorae found in Israel, which
from
is really
years ago, many
but
years ago.
I think in general, winemakers tend to muck around a lot less these days, don't they?
They do. They do to some extent, but I think there are still various ways to tinker, if you like. I mean, for example, there are different ingredients for the sweetness you can use in dosage. You know, you can have cane sugar, or you can have beet sugar, or you can have RCGM, which is a sweet sort of neutral spirit made from grapes.
Rectified
concentrated grape must.
Grape must.
It's not the most romantic of titles,
Pretty
is it?
sexy.
I think, RCGM sort of almost sounds better. I mean, in certain places you can still adjust the acidity with the dosage, but I think the main way of tinkering is actually via the choice of wine you add to top things up.
Yeah, so this is it.
This is where we're going,
Some people
isn't
just
it?
use the same wine that they're disgorging, which sounds a bit confusing, but what they'll do is they'll sacrifice a few bottles of the wine they're disgorging, mix that with the sugar, and that's what gets added back into the remaining bottles that are the same, that need topping up.
Which sounds a normal thing to do, doesn't
it's
it?
relatively normal.
Yeah.
But, you don't have to do that. Some people have batches of very special wine they keep just for the dosage. For example, Louis Roederer has a store of wine kept in oak that's famous for being even better than Cristal, their top wine. And that's what they use to, season their younger wines through the dosage.
It'd be quite nice to taste that, wouldn't it?
I know.
I wonder if we can get the keys to the cellar. Anyway, we'll come on to that in a bit when we talk to Jean-Baptiste Lécaillon. But what we're driving towards here is this thought. If you can add pretty much any wine to your dosage, and there are so many brilliant wines in the world nowadays, why not play around a bit and see if you can make something even better? Breaking free of the shackles of conformity in a bid to make something a bit new and different.
The X-Men approach to wine. Yes.
There we go.
Come on. Wine doesn't tend to do this thing very often, does it?
We're trying to big it up, make it more dramatic than it is.
But fine wine like champagne style sparkling it tends to be pretty traditional, doesn't it? But it's exciting when things do actually
New
happen.
things
and
happen.
That's what's happened. And the person who's made it happen is Justin Howard-Sneyd, an English master of wine who does many things.
Who we heard earlier.
One of which is making wine, both in the south of France, in the domain of the bee, and also in England. And that's what we're going to focus on, because Justin has been playing around with the dosage for his English fizz, Heart of Gold, as you mentioned earlier. He's been using various fortified and dessert wines as the sweetening agents, isn't he?
And we're going to share our chat with Justin in just a bit. But before we do that, he sent us these experimental wines and we've tasted them. Now, just to explain, the base wine for all six was Heart of Gold, his English sparkling wine. It was the 2014 vintage, and it's a blend of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, which has been aged for 5 years on the lees. And then in terms of dosage, the wines were as follows. So the first wine was zero dosage, so the control, if you like, just that wine, nothing else added. The other 5 were all sweetened to the same level, 8 grams per litre total residual sugar, using a mixture of our romantic RCGM and this is the fun bit, far more romantic, totally different wines.
So one bottle used Sauternes, one used Takai. The others included were port, Madeira and sherry. Now, only 18 bottles of each style were made.
We were quite privileged to taste these, weren't we?
We really were, actually.
Thank you, Justin.
Talk about a limited production run.
We did enjoy them a lot.
It made for an absolutely fascinating
Oh, my
tasting.
goodness, it did. It did. It really, really did. And dare I say it, I'm not sure this is a good thing to say, but for once we more or less agreed. Did we not?
We did,
more
sort
or less.
of.
Yeah. But to start with, at the beginning, the one place we didn't agree, the zero dosage, the control wine. We both thought it was good, actually pretty well balanced, which is rare for an English fizz with no dosage, to be honest. Yeah. But I definitely thought it was a more attractive drink than you did.
Yeah.
Didn't I?
You did.
I just liked it from the off, this one. I don't know why. Anyway, it was really nice and fruity. And
yes.
Yeah, I thought it worked well.
For me, it was just a classic thing with zero dosage wines, individual elements were admirable, but, as a whole, it was just a little bit unforgiving and slightly sort of, I don't know, joyless as an experience. It just felt slightly muted, I guess. Almost a sort of disappointment it wasn't more, or it could be something more, like someone singing under a duvet, that kind of thing. It's just a bit kind of, I don't know.
If certain people were singing under a duvet, I think I'd be quite happy.
Well, that's very true, I don't know, it just felt a bit abrupt and sort of slightly off-kilter as an experience.
I liked it.
Okay.
Anyway,
fair enough.
But let's move on, because where we both agreed was as soon as the dosage entered the picture, the wines, they were transformed. They were still dry, but with a different kind of depth and complexity and length and just different dimensions of flavour. So we both thought the Takai was the best, didn't we? Now, to be specific, was the Royal Takai 5 Pretonius 2013 blue label. So this is a Hungarian dessert wine. Yeah. And the reason we liked it was because it was subtle enough not to dominate, but it added to the complexity with some honeyed, orangey notes. I mean, very typical of Takai. And also it made the wine seem more energetic and cogent. Somehow it added to the acidity, but also made it rounder, which is an odd sort of combination. But it did, and you could really see this one aging and developing well.
Yeah, it was an intriguing wine, wasn't it?
It really was,
which was great. It was just really exciting.
No, it was.
And we compared
terrific.
it specifically to the Sauternes, didn't we?
Yeah.
Which was the Sauternes used was Chateau Coute 2001, just for interest. Now that didn't work as well because the Sauternes sort of dominated the wine more, didn't it? It was, those botrytis aromas really came through and just jarred a bit.
Maybe there was a bit too much in. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yes,
but,
exactly. Perhaps. Yeah. I mean, it did definitely make for a lovely rounded palate profile. Really sort of succulent and sort of quite sexy in a way. And some of the honey sort of flavours did work well, didn't they? You were talking about what?
Kumquats and what was I talking about? Tangerines. What on earth was I talking about?
I don't know. I lost track at that point. But,
you stopped listening.
As a whole, it was just a little bit too crazy. It really wasn't bad, but it was just a little bit off the charts.
Yeah, well, talking of crazy, let's talk about the port finish. So this was Taylor's 10-year-old Tawny, again, just for interest. And this was another one that really didn't work for us. Firstly, the colour was a bit of an odd pinky colour, which is fine. But more importantly, obviously, the flavour, the oxidative, slightly jammy fruit nature of the Tawny Port just seemed to jar with the freshness and vibrancy of the sparkling wine. It was like a dissonance in the tasting experience that was just hard to get past. It seemed a bit of a clash for us.
Which is weird because, we love Tawny, don't we?
We do. Oh, yeah. I mean, Tawny on its own.
It just didn't work for some reason.
No, and fair enough.
No, that's part of the point of doing these experiments, isn't it? What did work, by contrast, was the Madeira finish, which was the Blandy's 15-year-old Boal. And that's odd because it's not worlds away from the Tawny Port.
This is where we couldn't quite work it out, but we had some theories, didn't we?
Yeah, we thought one thing was maybe like the Takai, Madeira is a case of another naturally higher acid wine, which tied in really well with the fizz, because the fizz is a lot of it is about high acidity, energy. And, its very specific oxidative notes seem to harmonise better with the wine. So, Madeira delivers this sort of nutty baked fruit muscovado characters. And that somehow sort of accentuated the autolytic character of the sparkling wine. Perhaps it was a bit more obvious, a bit less subtle compared to the Takai, wasn't it?
Definitely less subtle.
Maybe you could say, well, hang on, that maybe that's for earlier drinking. And if you like a bit of Madeira, the earlier drinking, there you go, boom, wait for the Takai one for later.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And I also actually thought that it was a foodie fizz. If I can say generally a foodie fizz, but if being specific, something really like a truffle, if you're going to go posh, a truffle risotto or a nice creamy chicken and mushroom casserole, something quite rich and earthy. Nice. So it was a bit quirky, but really good. So then the final wine, the sherry finish, Lustau East India Solera it was. Now, This was, again, a really interesting one because at first it didn't impress us. It just seemed actually a bit, wasn't we disliked it, it just seemed a bit bland, a bit neutral. But then over time, and we did try these wines over a few days, didn't we? Over time, we just slowly kind of grew to love it, which I think is always a great sign in wine tasting.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more austere in style than the other fortified wines that Justin had used. It seemed a little bit drier too, but that was good. It was subtle. It was a bit of a sleeper.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got it there, haven't you?
I have. But it's a fascinating tasting all round. We've got the bottles here, surrounded by them, tasting them as we go, which you can probably tell. But overall, it just really brought home how much difference dosage can make to a wine, didn't it?
It absolutely did, and not just in terms of character, which can work or not work, but also just balance and completeness as a drinking experience.
Yeah, totally. So let's bring in Justin, maker of these wines, experimenter in chief. And I asked him why on earth he did this experiment in the first place.
Well, Peter, you know me, I get easily bored and I have a curious mind. And I remember back in the day, my dad used to have these parties at Christmas time, and he always used to serve champagne cocktails. So we would get 50, 60 champagne glasses, put a little sugar cube in the bottom, soaked in Angostura bitters, and then cover the sugar cube in brandy, and then pour champagne in on top of that. I used to rather like these, and as someone who was helping serve, age 15 or 16, I would frequently put my own glass down and lose it, and then have to start a fresh one. And normally you just keep topping people up with champagne, and then gradually the sugar dissolves, and eventually you're just drinking champagne at the end. But I had at least 4 or 5 champagne cocktails age 15, which definitely made the party go with a swing. So I have fond memories of that, and the fact that you could take a champagne and make it richer and more exciting tasting with some brandy in it. And then fast forward till about, must be 4 or 5 years ago now, when I was at one of the gatherings of Masters of Wine, which periodically happen, when really for no reason we just have a get-together. Me and Masters of Wine can gather and just have a chat with each other. And because one of the sponsors, as you know, of the Institute has for a very long time been Champagne House Bollinger, frequently Bollinger is served at these occasions. But there are also occasions for people to bring along bottles of their own wine. So we had a lineup of some quite interesting wines that people had brought along, and quite a lot of Bollinger. And we were chatting, and as the evening wore on, we decided to see if it would be quite a good idea to adjust the dosage of the Bollinger with some of the wonderful sweet wines and fortified wines that were ranging the room. So we had a little play and thought it was fantastic fun and really worthwhile. And the thought continued. So I started having a play with base wine for my sparkling wine, Heart of Gold, and my drinks cupboard, and decided that this was something we really should do. So it took a phone call to Simon Roberts at Ridgeview, which is the winery we work with to produce the Heart of Gold. And he was up for it. So I went down there with a set of bottles, and we did some trials, and we came up with these levels of dosage that we actually put into practice.
So what were your expectations? What were you sort of really hoping to achieve beyond having a bit of fun?
Well, I think there's a genuinely interesting historical fact that in Champagne they used to put all sorts of things in the dosage. Brandy being one, but molasses, who knows what they put in. In fact, the rules around what can go in the dosage are very unspecific. You can put a lot of things in the dosage. It doesn't even have to come from the Champagne region. The brandy certainly didn't. So that gave us the idea that the president was there to do something interesting. And I'm quite interested in the way that drink categories are bleeding into each other these days. So we know you can get whiskey in a port barrel or in a sherry barrel. I'm a big fan of Gosnell's mead, and you can get hopped mead, which has got hops in it. Tastes a little bit like beer. The cider producers fermenting their cider with Pinot Noir skins nowadays. So there's all sorts of ways in which one category is bleeding into another, and I think it's to be encouraged, and it's all in the creation of interesting drinks. So yes, I think if the flavours are valid and combine well and create something new and something interesting and different and exciting flavour, then I'm all for it. So I guess that was what I was hoping to try and see if we could achieve.
And following on from that then, what how do you think that these experiments have gone? What's your favourite? Do you think something here in these trials has worked to the extent that you're prepared to, put it a bit more on a larger scale commercial release?
Well, that is a very good question. And the answer is that we made 18 sets of each of these. I sold 12 to various of my customers and have kept back a few, tasted a few by now. I think we've got 2 sets left. But we recently did a tasting that Richard Bamfield put on at £6-7 mile. He was one of the 12 customers of mine who bought a set, but he then very generously said he wanted to open them in a assembled group of tasters. And so we had the chance to get the view of quite a large group. I think there were 10 of us in the end. There was a consensus that one was distinctly the most popular. I personally like all of them, and some of the ones that the group liked least, I like the most. So I really like the port finish, but the rest of the group weren't so convinced. So I think there's some merit in all of the ones we tried, but definitely the one that felt to be the most popular was the Takai finish. Now, possibly because Tokai's got quite nice high acidity combined with that sweetness, I think the wine had a bit more energy and a bit more lift, and that was what it was praised for. And the Takai flavours are quite subtle, but you could pick them. So we're actually doing a tasting next week with one of the Takai producers and a range of their wines to see if we can produce something that we think works for both of us, and maybe we'll produce a bigger volume.
So this could be something we see more of.
It could be. I mean, this is early days. I shouldn't be talking about this until we've decided, but it may not happen. But yes, I think we will definitely be doing another set of special dosage wines this year, and the likelihood is they will be certainly featuring a Takai, and possibly we might go some bigger volume and produce quite a few bottles of a Takai dosage wine.
You heard it here first. How fantastic. A question for you would be, you mentioned drinks bleeding into each other. Wine has sort of heroically resisted this, certainly in fine wine. Let's put it in fine wine territory, which these wines certainly are. Do you think wine should be doing more of this kind of experimentation?
Well, look, wine does have some quite strict rules which set what can go into wine and what can't. I've never been a great fan of rules, so it's quite fun trying to see, what could be done if you didn't have such strict rules. But the fact is we do have rules around what you're allowed to use in wine, and therefore it's not really likely to be going to be commercially successful to produce something that bends those rules and be able to call it wine. Look, I think this is an interesting experiment. I think the rules in this case do allow for quite a wide interpretation of what you can add during the dosage, and therefore, this is a perfectly legal product that other people could emulate. It could become a new category in wine, sparkling wine with a dosage. In fact, it is a category that exists already, because in Canada you can buy wine dosed with ice wine. In Spain you can buy cava that is dosed with sherry. So it's definitely not unknown. I wouldn't be surprised if in Hungary already you can find Takai dosed sparkling wine from Hungary. So I think we might well see more of this in the future.
And on that note, people using local products to dose their wines with. What about using an English sweet wine or another kind of wine?
Totally open to that. Great idea. There are not very many English sweet wines. I know Hattingley make one called Entice, which I suspect they might be having a play with themselves. I wouldn't be, if I was them, I would be. Why on earth not?
Okay. Justin Howard-Sneyd, thank you very much indeed.
That's a great pleasure. Very nice to talk to you.
I'm going to start by pointing out that we have actually already featured that Canadian fizz dosed with ice wine on Wine Blast, haven't we?
We have. I think we were pairing it with sweet chili crisps.
I wasn't going to mention that.
If I recall. It was Series 2, Episode 9, wasn't it?
It was highbrow, that one.
Canada Crisps and Beyond. That was fun, though, wasn't it?
It was. Almost
as
it was
much
fascinating,
fun as Justin's misadventures, age 15. Now, that sounded fun too.
Yeah, no, I didn't want those champagne cocktails. Oof, dear.
Right. Justin messing around with a bunch of Master Wine. He has some fun, doesn't he?
Yeah,
that was a bit better.
That was funny. But my ears particularly pricked up when he talked about how drinks categories are bleeding into each other, and how this special dosage fizz might end up becoming a new category for wine.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I mean, it's great to think the Takai finish might become a wider commercial release, isn't it? There's a scoop right there.
Very exciting, yeah. I mean, I do agree, though, that it would be good to try using something a bit more local. For example, Bacchus sweet wine. If you're going to be making it with English English sparkling wine.
Well, I was chatting to Justin after we finished recording, and he said he was partial to a bit of elderflower liqueur as a base for a champagne cocktail. So
he loves his champagne cocktails, doesn't he?
I know. Well, that's another episode we need to do. Champagne cocktails with Justin.
No. I remember in my youth having a bad time with champagne cocktails. I don't think we won't go back there.
Now.
No.
Oh, let's put Susie Barry on the rack and find out what that's all
I'd have rather
about.
been on the rack than how I felt after I'd had those champagne cocktails, frankly.
Well, there's so much to uncover there. I think this is the right point to move on to talk to Ed Carr, who's also been known to dabble and experiment a bit with his dosage.
Yeah, I mean, Ed is renowned for his magic touch with sparkling wine. He's chief sparkling winemaker for Accolade, a big group of wineries that includes some large volume commercial releases, but also at the top end, House of Arras from Tasmania. So he's hugely experienced, and he plays around with things like oaked wine in his dosage and also brandy or grape spirit. Anyway, I asked him to outline his approach to dosage.
We really aim to tailor the dosage to the specific wine at that point in time. We don't have preconceived ideas of what the actual dosage sugar level will be. We look all at balance. And I guess one thing we've really looked at over the time is the effect of tannin in that balance. And we try to triangulate tannin, sugar and acid to achieve the best balance for that wine. So we can manipulate tannin with the wine that we're using to carry the sugar, whether that be an oaked wine or a non-oaked wine. They are just give you that ability just to fine-tune that tannin, particularly with the acid-sugar balance, so that we're looking for a very dry style in general. We've found that our premium wines under the Arras brand and our sparkling wines in general have generally considerably dropped in dosage over particularly the last five years. And it's with that we think that if we manipulate the dosage to that level, we sort of expose more of the wine to the consumer. Like, you're not getting sugar masking of things. You're able to see all the individual bones of the wine, and I think that's a much more interesting sort of style and flavour.
So when you're selecting a base wine, when you talk about tannin, what have you found with your experimenting with the tannins then? Are you looking for a particularly low tannin wine? I mean, it's unusual to talk about tannins in this sense, isn't it? Because we're not talking about red wines. We're talking about sort of still white base wines. So what is the tannin element in that?
Our House of Arras wines contain up to 10% of the actual vintage base from that year, fermented in first use French oak casks. They can be small format as a barrique or larger foudre, up to 2,500 litres. But we're looking for a very fine grain tannin, and by fermenting in that oak, we obviously carry a very high percentage of that tannin and oak character with it. But then we can meter that into the individual base wine for that year to get the best balance that we can for that individual wine from that individual vintage. So our range is quite wide. It ranges probably between about 3.5% up to our highest has been about 11%. But it's just purely based on taste to get that tannin balance. We're not looking to make an oaked style, so we don't want the oak to be predominant, but having that tannin in the base, I think really builds some structure and maybe some precursors for other things to happen later with time on lees that give us the sort of perfect launch to get the wine to that final stage.
And just explain the relationship between lees aging and dosage as you've found it.
I mean, in general, the rule of thumb is the more time the wine spent on lees, the lower the dosage you'll need. You've built up that complexity and richness that you don't need sugar to sort of cover any gaps. But with time on lees, I think everybody talks about autolysis and yeast, but to me, there's two things happening. You've got that yeast breakdown after the secondary fermentation, but you've also got the wine aging as well. And those two are happening in parallel and in combination. So we look to sort of get that to a point with the time on lees for that wine where we think that's hit a nice balance for us. So there's no formula for that. It's all done on palate taste, really. But we, for each one of our labels, we have what we consider to be like a standard age. That's our target age to release that wine, and we make those wines with that idea in mind.
Now, you also, I understand, work with a range of brandies and spirits, and we've just actually tasted a selection of experimental wines that have Takai, Sauternes, Port Madeira or sherry in the dosage. And of course, historically people have used cognac, port, elderberry, kirsch, raspberry brandy as dosage. Is there anything in particular that you've experimented with that's worked better than you expected in terms of the dosage?
In terms of spirits, we're certainly staying away from heavily oaked spirits because we find them too extractive and too dominant. It does take away some of the elegance of the palate. So we've looked at generally white grape spirit, but at more the sort of tails end, the heavy end of the spectrum. We really look at where we're going to get the most effect. And for us, it's been in that sort of broader spirit, which is slightly candle wax or lanolin, and absolutely tiny amounts of that can really influence the palate. And again, it's all done by trial, and a lot of wines don't receive that. But particularly some of the younger wines, that can help just smooth over some of the cracks that might be there and put a general palate sweetness.
So what are your feelings on zero dosage and the trends around lower dosage in the world of traditional wine, traditional method sparkling wine?
We've got a pretty open mind on that. I guess we haven't made a zero dosage as yet, although we're getting very close to it. We're releasing a museum Blanc de Blanc this year from 2005, and we ended up adding about 1.5 grams of actual sugar to that, so 1.5 grams per litre. So that's the closest we have so far, but we tried to vary around that as an example of the lowest possible numbers that we've used, and we still couldn't force it much lower without losing something out of the balance. I have no issues at all with zero dosage wines if they're refreshing and drinkable, rather than just a novelty.
How does sugar? You're saying you haven't got to zero dosage yet because the balance isn't right. So how does sugar impact the flavour and the quality of these traditional method wines?
In younger wines, as I mentioned, I think the sugar does actually impart more approachability. Some of the acids might be a little bit raw because the wine hasn't had a lot of opportunity to grow around that acid. Again, in the older wines, I think the sugar plays less of an effect, but I can't think of another word other than sweet spot, which makes you think I'm only talking about sugar, but there's a sweet spot between sugar, tannin, acid, where the wine just sort of is totally seamless. You're just looking for that point where you can't find a gap in that final wine.
Okay, so looking to the future, final question, and talking about things that you could do. Is there anything that you would really love to try with dosage right now that maybe commercial concerns prevent you from doing?
Not really. I mean, I guess as long as we stay within the Australian winemaking rules and regulations that we have, we're sort of open to try, those different sugars and the different spirits and whatever. But it's not something that we're putting a lot of active focus on right now, because we're very comfortable. I guess there's an element of risk in that, but we're very comfortable with the results that we're getting at the moment. We've really looked at the bigger picture in terms of oak coopers and which forests and which coopers and which level of toast and char that we want. That's where our major focus has been at the moment. And also with our rosé styles, looking at a red-based liqueur to influence the colour and tannin at the final stage of a rosé, trying to reintroduce some young, fresh fruit into that wine, which has been on lees for a long time. And so you're trying to get it with rosé, to me, trying to get two wines in one. You're trying to get that really rush of bright red fruit and a little bit of crimson colour with all those secondary age characters to back it up. So we go through the same process with our rosés, and one of the options that comes in with our rosé is using a dry red wine that's made specifically for that purpose of low tannin, high colour and bright fresh fruit as the vehicle to carry the dosage for that wine.
And it works well.
Yeah, it's just the opportunity to be able to fine tune some of the bright fruit characters and the actual colour of the rosé towards the, at that last stage. That's the manipulation that you've got. You can do the liqueur, then you put your cork in it, and then it does what it wants to do after that. So
is that Pinot Noir or Meunier or a blend?
That'll be Pinot Noir. That's something we could do. We haven't tried Pinot Meunier, but we have some lovely, vineyard patches of Pinot Noir in Tasmania that we've selected them over time, found quite intense flavour and fruit-driven style with a lot of colour, but not necessarily a lot of tannin. And the way that we're making them is to minimise the tannin. Still got to have enough tannin that it's colour stable, obviously, but just to have that last little bit of an opportunity just to fine tune a rosé style.
Sounds delicious. I think it's time we went and had a glass of rosé. Ed Carr, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Susie. It's been great. Very thought stimulating, really. I'll have to go back to the desk again. Yep.
So you're sending one of the best sparkling winemakers in the world back to his drawing board. You and your Pinot Meunier. Well, honestly,
I think he's probably just being nice, frankly. But he's a thoughtful chap, so you never know. Anyway, really interesting to hear his take. Also on using oat wine for the dosage, how that can change a wine and set it up to age really well. Not just in terms of delivering tannins, which can come from grape skins, but also from the oak, but also the flavour and structure and setting the wine up to mature.
Yeah, and that's something I think that sugar has a role in too, doesn't it? There is the school of thought that sugar isn't just about sweetening, but also, allows the wine to develop extra flavours. So in a similar way to the Maillard reaction in cooking caramelizes flavours, so sugar enables or encourages similar things to happen over time in wine. That's how long-aged champagne develops those sort of toasty, biscuity flavours. But if you don't have that sweetness in the first place, that won't happen.
Well, and yet, as Ed noted, traditional method sparkling wines are getting ever drier, which we've talked about already. So you do wonder how this aspect of the wines will be altered. Perhaps better to drink these lower dosage wines younger, for example.
Yeah.
So they don't have to age.
Of drinking younger and of lower dosage. We've got a couple more bottles here, haven't we?
We have.
Reaching around for the Arras Brut Elite Cuvée 1601 from Tasmania, made by Ed, has 3.5 grams per litre of dosage, and the Louis Roederer Philippe Starck Brut Nature champagne as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do love the Arras wines. I tried the Grand Vintage 2013 recently, and yeah, they're extreme. In fact, I've tried it a couple of times recently, and it's just very good. And this one, the 1601 has that classic Tasmania freshness, but also with a lovely seamless palate profile, with just a touch of roundness and complexity, because it has a small amount of oak, like Ed was talking about. I don't know about brandy on this one. Probably should have asked. Who knows?
Who knows? I'll have to go back to him. But it's nice, isn't it? So that's low dosage rather than no dosage. So the one I've got here, the Roederer Starck, is proper zero dosage or Brut Nature, so a slightly different beast. And it's already aged quite a bit too. It's a 2012 vintage.
Good vintage, great vintage.
Yeah, with 15% vinified in oak and no malolactic fermentation, interestingly, which you wouldn't necessarily expect in a Brut Nature anyway. And you do get that evolution here in the aromatics, don't you? They're beautiful. The palate, though, is very dry. Very dry,
very dry. I think some people would love this. It's definitely better with food. We tried it with some deep fried calamari, didn't we? And that was gorgeous. But it's not a style that's easy to warm to or drink lots of, but it is an excellent example of zero dosage.
This is all very interesting coming from someone who used to be, or still is, something of an expert on this topic.
Yeah, well, doing my master of wine dissertation on low dosage champagne was a real eye opener. It was actually back in 2009, 2010.
Are you serious?
When zero dosage was all the rage, or it was just beginning to be all the rage, be super trendy, and the findings of the dissertation were really interesting. The trade definitely preferred zero dosage to consumers, but I think that is what you'd expect. And what was really interesting for me was that I think during that time, I kind of got a taste for it. And I think that can happen. If you drink a lot of something like zero dosage, you can get habituated to the taste, if you like, and it seems normal. It's what you start to prefer.
I think that happens a lot in wine, winemakers sort of lose touch. Sometimes sommeliers, sometimes wine writers too, but particularly winemakers can lose touch with what real people are drinking and what they like. And I think that's happening now in the world of sparkling wine. Producers are going for low or no dosage because they think it's trendy. So they make it, they get a taste for it, but not really because it's what the wine needs. And the results, let's be honest, in the worst cases, can be pretty revolting.
Revolting is strong. I mean, I would say, to be fair, just wines that are a bit out of balance. Or wines, I tell you what it is, wines that could have been so much better if they'd had a proper dosage. That's often the thing that gets you. You taste a wine, you think, oh, that's so disappointing because if only the winemaker had dosed it properly. Yeah.
So maybe intense disappointment is part of that revulsion that I have. But, either way, life's too short, Okay. So,
horses for courses.
By way of compromise, there probably is a place for low and no dosage, but it's definitely a niche. And it just needs proper thinking through rather than just, this is trendy, let's do that, we were lucky enough to have, what was it?
What was it? I know what you're going to talk about now.
The 1976 Boulanger RD recently, which is very low dosage. So it wasn't no dosage, but it was 3 to 4 grams per litre, so extra brut.
Yeah.
But it had just aged beautifully, in a very particular style. It would have aged differently if it wasn't that low dosage, I think, but because it had aged very, very well. It had been thought through. It was a ripe vintage, mainly Pinot Noir, long lees aging. It was disgorged in, I think it was 2013, wasn't it? So 37 years on the lees, So that's worked
mad, isn't it,
as a very low dosage style. But, that is very much the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there are two different things here. No dosage, but also gradually and sensibly lowering dosage, which is pretty much what Ed was talking about.
Yeah, so I think time now just to hear a snippet from our last interviewee, Louis Roederer cellar master Jean-Baptiste Lécaillon, one of the most respected sparkling winemakers in the world, maker of Cristal, among other things. And you asked him to tell us about his approach to dosage at Roederer.
Yes, we have a dosage is a final touch of the wine. It's very important because you open a wine that has been kept in a very close atmosphere for so many years, very reductive, and then you create the first contact with oxygen. And the wine and you remove the leads. So it's another development for the wine. So it's a very important moment in the life of Champagne. What we do at Roederer is that we prepare each disgorgement a long time before, doing many trials with different sugar levels for sure, but not only the sugar, different liquor, different base wine to prepare the sugar, different jetting or not jetting, adding some oxygen or not oxygen, different sulfur regime. Lots of different things, different kind of sugar, by the way, which can have a very strong effect. If you use an organic cane sugar from South America, or an organic cane sugar from Philippines, or beetroot sugar from Champagne, or MCR, it's a completely different wine.
And do you find that there's something that you prefer, or do you just...
Yes, we challenge ourselves every year, but now we have a good idea. We use a lot of organic cane sugar for sure. This is for us the best product, but we challenge our producers to make sure we get the right one and that it has the effect we want. So dosage, often people say, it's 2 grams, it's 4 grams, it's 7 grams, but that's not the issue of dosage. This is what you use, the way you do it, what wine you add, when you do it, and if you use jetting or not jetting, what sulfur do you add? There's so many parameters that you have to prepare it very meticulously to be sure of your results.
And you use your top wines, don't you, in Dosage?
Yeah. This is Cristal. Cristal that I keep in oak, and that I keep from different vintages. So, for example, now I'm disgorging my 2018, my collection 243. I'm disgorging with some 2000 Cristal 2013.
Now, there's been a trend for low dosage recently. Would you say are there any other particular trends going on in dosage at the moment? Is it still for lower dosage, or is there something different?
For me, the dosage, it's not a question of trend. It's a question of what the wine needs. And as we said, the wines are getting riper, more vintage-like, more richer in texture, so they need less sugar at the end. This is why we drop the sugar slowly and slowly. It's not because we want to drop the sugar. It's because we don't need it. So I think we can see some the trend to lower dosage is still on. Now, maybe not to Brut Nature, maybe not zero dosage, but the trend to lower dosage is on. People prefer the wines with less dosage.
Jean-Baptiste, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Susie. It was a pleasure.
Talk about precision when it comes to dosage. Now, we should clarify that MCR is the same as RCGM.
MCR.
Yeah, MCR. Though Jean-Baptiste obviously prefers organic cane sugar for the sweetening, as he said. He also mentioned jetting, which isn't relevant here, but just to explain is...
Sounds a bit rude. I'm going to say jetting. Sorry.
Well, you might be just jetting off around the world.
Well,
that's the other way of looking at it.
Okay.
But to explain, it's a high-tech process that's done at the same time as the dosage to get rid of the oxygen in the bottleneck before the cork's put in. He also talks about adding sulfur, or SO2, which does a similar thing and is often added in the dosage.
Yeah. But it's also really interesting to hear his thoughts on the trend to ever lower sweetness levels, isn't it? You know, for him, it's all about balance. It's what the wines need because they're being harvested riper and richer, you know, partly because of global warming.
Yeah. And if you want to hear a bit more from Jean-Baptiste on things, you know, like his winemaking approach and climate change in Champagne, do check out our episode called The New Champagne, which is totally fascinating. Well, even if I do say so myself, it is. It's a lot about Jean-Baptiste as well.
Where's that bushel to hide your light behind? Anyway, I think it's time to wrap things up. So I think we need our own version of a special dosage to put the final sweet touch to this episode.
Oh, no.
So come on, you're on a bit of a roll. Over to you.
Yeah, okay. Final thoughts. Well, you know, people sometimes refer to dosage as being like seasoning or salt. You don't add it to a dish to make it salty, but to enable the other flavours to shine. It's a fine art, which involves a great deal of attention to detail. And when it's done well, it can help a wine to taste sublime. And we'd encourage more respect for it and awareness of the art of putting the right dosage with the right wine, and for more winemakers to do it properly rather than opting for zero dosage by default.
Yeah. Just to add, you know, I remember doing some dosage trials when I visited Roederer. Actually, we tried 3 different versions of the same wine with just 0.5 centilitre of different liqueur d'expédition from 3 different vintages or years. They made a big difference. You know, I love the 96 because it gave the wine a bit more focus and a finer finish, much more sort of power and weight and perfume.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. It's not like dosage is a done deal. There's always a place for experimentation, new things to try and discover. And, you know, maybe, as Justin says, there's a place for a special dosage sparkling wine category.
Yeah, certainly if there's a place for zero dosage, there should be a place for special dosage. It's all about specialness. Anyway, our time is up, but the debate will continue. Thank you for joining us. And thanks also to Justin Howard-Sneyd, Ed Carr and Jean-Baptiste Lécaillon. Leave us a sparkling review and rating if you can. And until next time, cheers.